Hello and welcome to your genetic engineering notes. So we're going to start off with just a couple of pictures and then we'll move on into what genetic engineering is. So on the left, these are GMOs, which is genetically modified organisms. Remember, an organism is any animal or plant, any living thing really. So these are peach and apple trees that are grown in a lab, and they are genetically modified. And then on the right side, these are wheat seeds, okay, and they're treated with a special bacteria to make them more immune to fungal disease, but they are genetically modified. What is the difference between the mice in these two groups? So if we first start here, on the left side with the purple glove, on the very far left, this little mouse here is genetically modified so that the gene affecting hair growth has been knocked out. So that's why his hair looks different. He's actually not growing as much. Where the little guy on the right has he's a normal mouse. No genetics have been modified. Okay, so we can actually make hair stop growing. I think in the right picture it is fairly obvious. In the middle is a normal mouse, and then the other two have been genetically modified with the bioluminescence light, and that is expressed in the green fluorescent protein. So yes, we can make animals glow. Okay. So what actually is genetic engineering? It is direct modification or altering, changing of the genome. So genetic engineering is the direct modification of an organism's genome, which is the list of specific traits or genes stored in the DNA. So remember, a genome is all the genes that code for you. What makes you you in your DNA. Genes are small pieces of your DNA, and the gene codes for a specific protein. That protein is what either affects the trait or makes it work. So in this case, actually pretty much everything you see in an organism is a result of a protein or something a protein does. So with genetic engineering, changing the genome enables engineers to give desirable properties to different organisms. Organisms created by genetic engineering are called genetically modified organisms, or GMOs for short. And you'll see that, you'll see GMOs quite a bit. All right, let's look at the history of GMO development. So it's fairly new in terms of the world, but in 1973, that's when the first fish were created with genetically modified bacteria. In 1974, we created genetically modified mice. 1982, first commercial development of GMOs, so insulin-producing bacteria. So commercial means like we're going to be able to sell it, okay, something that is useful. 1994, we begin to sell genetically modified food. And in 2003, we begin to sell the first genetically modified organisms as pets. And that's what you see to the right. Those are called glowfish. And yes, they actually glow. So what is the genetically or GMO process? Like, how does it happen? What do we do? All genetic changes affect the protein synthesis of an organism. So synthesis means making of. And so we're just we're changing the making of the protein. By changing which proteins are produced, genetic engineers can affect the overall traits of an organism. So genetic modification can be completed by a number of different methods, and some of that got cut off, but I'll read that to you. Inserting new genetic material randomly or in targeted locations. The second way is direct replacement of genes. That's called recombination. The third way is removal of genes And the last one that got cut off a little bit, sorry about that, is mutation of existing genes. Existing genes. So basically the process is we find the desirable gene in the organism. So like this little bit of, so right here, actually let's stop for a second. Here is a cell. This is the nucleus. These are other little organelles in the cell. So if we look in the nucleus even closer, we have inside there the chromosome, and the chromosome is just the DNA that's been coiled very tightly. A little bit of the chromosome, that DNA, is one gene. So like another gene could be here, and another gene could be here. So it's just a piece of the DNA. So again, we find that desirable gene in the organism, the one that we want to change. We extract the entire DNA from the organism. We remove the gene from the rest of the DNA. Basically, we cut it out using enzymes, which are special proteins. And then we insert the new gene in the desired DNA. Okay, so basically it's a cut and paste. That's what we do. We cut and paste. And again, if you missed it, that bottom word that got cut off is genes. All right, so let's look a little bit at some of the stuff we've created. This is GMO bacteria. So bacteria are the most common GMOs because their simple structure permits easy manipulation of their DNA. So they are simple. They are not as complex as larger animals or plants or humans. And because they reproduce so quickly, it's easy to see what has been done. So one of the most interesting uses for genetically modified bacteria is the production of hydrocarbons, and that's plastics and fuels, and that's usually only found in fossil fuels. So I know you've heard about fossil fuels like gas and on the radio, TV, anything you're reading, but we can actually make them using bacteria. So on this side, this is cyanobacteria, and this is E. coli. But cyanobacteria is kind of a blue-green algae, and it's been modified to produce plastic, polyethylene, and fuel, butanol, as byproducts of photosynthesis. So during photosynthesis, instead of just making sugar and oxygen, it's also making plastics and polyethylene and butanol. E. coli, which is this one right here, which can actually make you very sick, but it has been modified to produce diesel fuel. Okay, so some interesting uses. Oops, let me go on. All right, so engineering plants. How might genetic engineering modify plants to solve everyday problems? So just think for a minute, what could you use plants for? If we could change them a little bit, what could you use them for besides what we already do? So again, think of kind of problems in this world like hunger, weather, insecticide pollution. And just know when we start talking about plants that this is a lot of money coming in, a lot of money. Okay. So with genetically modified crops, GMO crop production in the U.S., this was taken from 2010, but 93% of our soybeans, which is also used as a preservative, is genetically modified. 93% of our cotton is genetically modified. 86% of corn is genetically modified. Corn used to be a grass. We have changed it over the years. And 95% of our sugar beets. Okay. This right here is the BT corn, and that has just been genetically modified to become more resistant to poisonous, it's become poisonous to insects, but not to humans. So I've just genetically modified it to become poisonous to insects, but not humans. Other desirable qualities that we've put into our crops are making them herbicide, drought, and freeze, and disease resistant. Also increasing our yield, how much we get from one plant. Faster growth, improved nutrition, and a longer shelf life. So normally without preserving things, this wouldn't last very long, and now you can actually get fruits and vegetables that will last a couple of weeks without anything else taking care of them. So here are some other plants that we've genetically modified. We'll start up here with the banana vaccines. So there's a modified virus injected into the sapling tree and causes the banana to contain virus protein. So you're actually kind of taking a vaccine if you eat the banana. And we have venomous cabbages. So scorpion genes added to the cabbage prevent insects from eating it because it'll kill the insects, but not us. Again, this is a big money industry. So the value of genetically modified seeds was $13.2 billion in the US alone. But then the value of the end products, like the food we eat, end up being over $160 billion. There are things, again, other reasons, actually I went all over these, reasons to genetically modify. So again, insect resistant. If they're already insect resistant, we don't have to spray them with anything. Herbicide resistant, drought and freeze resistant, disease resistant, higher yield, faster growth, improved nutrition, and longer shelf life. So again, those are all reasons to genetically modify our plants. How about engineering animals? Could genetic engineering be used to modify any animals to solve problems? So I want you to think about that for a second. What would you do? Could you solve a problem by genetically modifying an animal? Okay. Here is some stuff we've already done. And so bioluminescent animals. So this is like what we did, I showed you earlier with the mice. So we took the bioluminescence here and we inserted that gene into mice, and they now can glow. So why would we do this? So protein tracking, so we can actually like follow something because we can see it if we're trying to track a protein through the body. Disease detection using bioluminescent imaging to identify different types of cells. So again, if we can insert some cells with this glowing, then possibly we can follow or find diseases. And then money, novelty pets, like you can buy glowfish right now. So these are bioluminescent animals. Most of our farm animals, food you eat, have been genetically modified. So we have fast growing salmon. So genes from 2 other fish cause the salmon to continually produce growth hormone. Growth hormones usually stop at a certain age, which you can see this is a farm salmon, which is what you would find in nature. So the average length is about 13 inches and 2.8 pounds at 18 months. But with genetically modified salmon, it keeps secreting that hormone. So it keeps getting bigger, keeps getting bigger. So now we have a salmon that's 24 inches and has a average weight of 6.6 pounds at, again, that same age of 18 months. So more food, possibly less money. That's one reason. Less smelly cows. So we have modifying bacteria responsible for methane production in cattle results in 25% less flatulent cows. The cows are not passing gas as much with this extra bacteria in there and putting methane into the atmosphere. So those, again, it's mostly food is why we would genetically modify animals. So let's go back to the future. Is this possible? Could Spider-Man be real? If we take the genes from Spider and put it in a person, are we going to get Spider-Man? Okay. Not quite yet. That is still those are still good movies, but that is not possible yet. But what we have done is for the hopefully for future use, we have spider genes in goats, and those goats produce spider silk in their milk. So we don't have high enough quantities yet to actually use, but we're hoping that they will be used in the future for construction, because the spider silk is so strong, it's amazingly strong and elastic. I think it's one of the strongest materials in the world. And we can use it for like bridge cables, airbags that are gentler, but still very strong and will keep you safe. For medicine, so artificial skin for burn victims, or artificial ligaments if you break yours, or tear yours. We could use it for thread for stitching wounds, and then also in the military for body armor. So again, this is what we hope to use it for in the future, but the goat does not produce it in large enough quantities to make it actually useful. So these are all like good things that we can use genetically modifying for, but there are also concerns. So these are GMO concerns. So what are some of the concerns regarding genetically modified foods and animals? So a risk to human health, unsafe to eat. Because again, we don't know long term. Whenever we make something new, we don't know the long-term benefits or harmful. We don't know. Harm to the environment and wildlife. If we are changing stuff, does that change affect something else, and then affect something else, and then affect something else? Because again, if we're planting these trees out in the wild, they're making seeds. So those seeds that go off in the wind, is that going to affect the world we live in? Increased in pesticide and herbicide use, because we have plants that are resistant. Insects that eat them also become resistant, so we have to actually develop new chemicals to fight those new insects. The farmer's health. So if they're around these plants and animals all the time, if they're using the pesticides or whatever, we don't know what's going to happen to their health. Seed and pollen drift, and this goes back to like the trees and plants. 93% of our soybeans are genetically modified. Those seeds get carried on the wind. Is that going to affect the environment? Is it going to take over so we have no biodiversity? We have no other types, even in the wild. What happens if one disease comes? It can wipe out our entire soybean population because there's no other types. Creation of herbicides, resistant super weeds. Well, that's kind of what I was talking about up here. And what about genetic engineering in humans? Okay, so oops, this got cut off too. Nearly 50 countries in the world, including Australia, Japan, and all countries in the European Union, have enacted significant restriction or full bans on the production and sale of genetically modified organism food products. And 64 countries now have GMO labeling requirements. So all the countries that I just talked about, most of Europe, Australia, Japan, they don't have genetically modified food. They don't allow it in their countries. The US, we do. If you look at pretty much anything in a can or a box, it is genetically modified. So next time, go look at your labels, because we do require labeling, but it will say genetically modified on it. So there's lots of pros and cons. Everything is still new. Things are changing and developing all the time, which is part of science. So again, the biggest thing right now is safety of people, safety of animals, and the environmental impact. So that's what you should be looking for in the future. Thank you.